Hello and welcome to episode 9 of Crime Scene to Screen. We have a very special edition just to get in the mood of the season. We are going to cover John Carpenter's 1978 classic Halloween, and we thought who better to bring on to the panel for this special discussion than a huge fan of it, as you can probably see in the panel screen there, than local filmmaker and composer Jim McMorrow. Hi Jim, welcome
Hello,
to
Rachel.
the
How
show.
are you?
We're good, thanks. And also, welcome to my fellow sleuth sister, as Jim, our commander in chief, likes to call us. Good evening, Therese.
Good evening, Joe. Jim, how are you both?
We're good, all good, all good. And just excited to talk about Halloween, especially with the latest film in the cinemas. It'll probably come up at some point during our discussion, but as always, we're not just talking about the film here. We're talking about the crimes and the stories that influence the case. So, in the case of Halloween, we are going to look at well, I say this in inverted commas, the true story of Stanley Steer, but the very true story of Charlie Brandt as well. So the way we're going to handle things is I'm going to go over the story of Stanley, and then Therese is going to pick things up with Charlie, and then we're just going to go through the cases before tackling John Carpenter's classic. So first thing first, I am going to go over young Stanley here, and before we really get into it, I really should say that this is well, it's not a true story, as I've come to find out in my research of it. I was convinced for the longest time it was. But yeah, when you get into it, and as you're probably going to hear, a lot of it is a case of, well, that's a bit too good to be true. And it definitely is. So, the Steer story begins in an Iowa hospital in 1912 when a nurse with questionable morals decided to switch two babies just for the crack in the nursing ward. The parents of both families were overjoyed to have a newborn, healthy child, but tragedy would befall both of them in very different ways. So, not realizing what transpired, both families took home the wrong child, and on the way home, the true Steer's child had been taken home with an unknown family, and they had died in a car accident on the way home. And that is how the other family with young Stanley found out that, well, Stanley wasn't their own. And then their grief over the whole discovery of, not having the right child turned them to alcohol, and they resented Stanley as not being their biological child. Stanley went through an awful rough childhood by the accounts given about his story. He was verbally abused by them, locked in his room, and anything they could think of to make him miserable, they did it. Just because he wasn't their actual son. That's the only reason. So then, sometime later, they actually had a child of their own, a little girl called Susie. They viewed her as the apple of their eye, and they would lavish all their love and attention on him, while Stanley, was still just in misery, basically. But young Susie all picked up on her parents' awful habits, and then she decided to start picking on Stanley verbally and physically. And it wasn't limited to their home life. He would be bullied in school based on his looks and his behaviour, because he was somewhat of an outcast, and in a lot of cases Susie would join in with the bullying, and as a result Stanley's education suffered, and his development as a person was just absolutely awful. But all of this had come to a head on the 30th of October 1923, when young Stanley was 11 years old. He had wanted to go trick-or-treating with the other children in the neighbourhood, but his parents had refused it, while Susie was allowed to go to a Halloween party. So, at midnight, after Susie had come home from her party, Stanley took a butcher knife from the kitchen. He went into Susie's room and he stabbed her to death. Does that sound very familiar to both of you?
I was just about to say cue the music. Like literally carbon copy there. Just that
Pretty
same
much.
exact bit. Yeah.
Pretty much. But yeah, he stabbed Susie to death with the butcher knife, and then he snuck into his parents' room and murdered them too. And he even took out his rage on the family dog, Mr. Snookers, killing the poor animal as well. I was actually with Stanley up to the point he decided to kill the dog, I'm just saying. You know, I don't care about the family. That's the thing. Is even when it comes to horror films in general, like, do what you want to people, kill them in the most brutal, sadistic manner possible, but just don't hurt the dog. That's the golden rule.
Wow. So you must really not like Michael Myers.
I know. He bloody had a dog.
Well, you get you know.
I know, like, you know, I'm sure there were rats in the house or something. You didn't have to kill the dog. Even if it was, well, no, I'll not go that far. I was going to say a cat, but no, cat's all right. I'm just more of a dog person. Put it that way.
Have you ever, just to interrupt, this is completely...
No, please do.
Have you ever seen the film Shooting Dogs about the Rwandan genocide?
I don't think I want it based on the title alone.
I
have. Oh god, it is awful.
It's harrowing, absolutely harrowing. And I remember in my job as a teacher, I was telling a colleague about it and telling her about the story, and she said, "Whoa, stop! Do any dogs get shot?" And I said, "No," and she said, "That's fine, I can watch it then." And I was like, "You do know that like 1 million Rwandans were killed? Like, that's fine."
You do realise that it is about the Rwandan genocide, literally mass murder.
Yeah, but were any dogs involved in that? That's the big question, according to that one. Like,
it's okay. No golden labs were harmed in the making of Shooting Dogs. It's totally fine.
Thank goodness, just innocent men, women, and children.
Yeah.
That's like going on that website, does the dog die, and searching Schindler's List. Is this okay to look up? I know it's about the Holocaust, but do any dogs actually die?
Exactly.
You know, what kind of, I don't know, it takes a special kind of person to do something there. But anyway, back to young Stanley and away from dogs and genocide. Yeah, so basically after he'd murdered his family, he was free from their abusive tendencies. So he finally got to fulfill his wish of going trick-or-treating the following night. But his bloodthirst from the previous night hadn't gone away, and whilst he was out trick-or-treating, he bumped into a group of the children who'd bullied him in school, and he decided to take them out one by one. And on one occasion, he even chased one of the bullies down into their family home and killed not just him, but their entire family. So you can see now how things are starting to become, you know, we're entering the territory of, hang on, I don't think this is true. Like, because there were reports that whenever he committed these acts, he had superhuman strength for a child, because he was able to like tackle adults and bring them down and you know, attack and eventually kill them.
And he was wearing a William Shatner mask, and he was wearing a blue overalls as well. For a child, that's a really strange thing, but apparently at the time it was really fashionable. Like a really fashionable Halloween costume.
Even before Shatner was even born, he had a Shatner mask.
Mm-hmm.
And he was breathing really, really deep as well.
I know.
Very, very nasally. Like he had like quite severe asthma, but they'd never mentioned that before.
Yeah, grunting quite a bit and all that. Yeah. Some therapist was chasing him around with a gun. But anyway, back to Stanley's story. He was found the next morning sitting on a swing in the school playground, gleefully eating his candy. Whenever police confronted him. Immediately he was detained to a private psychiatric institution where he was examined over the course of the next 13 years. And during his time there, all records were suppressed to make it look like, you know, Stanley never existed, his crimes never existed, none of this existed, sweep it under the rug, and this small town in Iowa, you know, this is just going to be an urban legend. And, well, to be honest, it is an urban legend when you actually get into it, but yeah, in this case it was just a case of, Stanley, he's not real. He never was real. He's already becoming a mythic character, a bit like Michael in that respect. So essentially when they were studying, they just wanted to know, why did he snap? You know, what is it with Stanley that just, you know, drove him to this murderous rage? They toyed with ideas such as demonic possession and basically anything linked to the paranormal, thinking, okay, well, fair enough, you know, let's not look at maybe the actual, you know, effects of like a very poor home life, poor education at school or anything like that. Let's just go straight to the paranormal here and just assume, it's probably satanic in some shape or form, or it's a ghost possessing him or something. No, it's nothing to do with him having a poor upbringing or anything like that, or even potential head injury or anything. As Therese knows, she's Therese, the 5 C's or the 3 C's? Usually that
it's the 3 C's. So frontal lobe, she'll have your accident as a child, it'll be your right frontal lobe.
Mm-hmm.
arson, being obsessed with fire, and murdering animals as a young child. Some people think there's also a fourth one, which is wetting the bed, but it's not talked about quite a lot because I suppose it's a bit embarrassing. I mean, it's what could be more embarrassing than, you know, gutting a cat, pissing your bed. So normally that's why it's not mentioned.
Well, the thing is, right, is that not, you know, common enough in very young children, or is it just at a stage later in life when, you know, they should have outgrown it?
Yeah, so I think Ed Kemper and almost sure Richard Ramirez. So it was whenever they were in like their teens, tend to be bedbutters. And Ed Kemper's mother will be. If you've never heard of Ed Kemper, you need to watch Mindhunter. But he didn't have a great relationship with his mother. And one night he wet the bed, and his mother put his face into where he had wet the bed. So yeah, there is that. So it could have been just like the abuse from his mummy on top of it. But we're going off on a tangent.
Yeah, but we're almost finished.
Normally do. Normally do.
Well, we're almost finished with Stanley's story anyway, so not to worry. So yeah, a bit like in the film, on Halloween night in 1936, at the age of 24, Stanley reignited his murderous rage that had been unseen for 13 years. During his incarceration, he had grown to the height of 6'4" and weighed 260 pounds. So he basically went from this scrawny little boy to this basic, you know, mountain of a man who would just go through anything in pursuit of whatever he wanted to do. And during this time, a couple of orderlies had begun harassing him. So in response to this, he decided to break their necks and break out of the institution. And this is where things are, you know, we're completely leaving the realm of believability now. Like there's no coming back from this here, because he walked out of the institution and was met by armed resistance from some police officers who were in the parking lot. He continued to walk right past them despite being shot at multiple times, and he attacked and killed them. And again, it was reported he possessed superhuman strength, and he was able to lift and throw a car on some occasions. So, as you do, you get kicked out of a pub, you know, and the bouncers start attacking you, but you know, you just casually lift a car and chuck it at them, you know. It's that superhuman strength that you get from the drink. Only Stanley had nothing. He was a stone cold sober little boy. So, as a result, nobody, you know, once he'd left the scene of the crime, nobody knows what happened to him. He sort of just disappeared into the night and was never really heard of again. There were reports that he continued his murders, and they still popped up across the country, and it was even rumoured that he murdered the nurse who had set him up on his life of misery. So, again, finishing the story, with there being no legitimate or legal record of Stanley Steers, we can never know for sure if he really existed or if he's just the stuff of crime folklore. But you have to say it is an interesting story, and you can maybe see how maybe Carpenter and Deborah Hill heard of this urban legend and decided to just take little bits and pieces and apply it to Halloween. But we'll get into that when we eventually get into the film. But for now, I'm going to pass it over to you, Therese, and you're going to go into the true case now of Charlie Brandt.
Yes, so we go from I was going to say fact to fiction, but it's the other way around. It's fiction to fact. And part, do you know what? Well, not that I want to wish someone a murderous, raging psychopath to be real, but you know, part of Stanley's story, as you said, you get up to a certain point and you do believe that it's real, and then it starts getting a lot of shite. But yeah. But I did enjoy researching Stanley as well, and just sort of seeing the different it referenced a lot of the other sort of urban myths that are out there and the urban legends that, you know, have came into folklore, and some as well have originated from, I suppose, minor true stories. So you never know, there might be something tiny bit true about Stanley. But yeah, we moved from Stanley to someone who was a real life guy. And his name was Carl Charlie Brandt. And to be honest, it was somebody that I didn't really know anything about before researching. I obsess over true crime podcasts, and tend to look for those that do have the sort of irregular stories, not the ones that you normally hear. So I did have a search to see if there was any of the regular podcasts I listened to cover it. But I didn't see anything before, but I'm sure there's something out there. So I'll maybe follow up after. But yeah, we'll get into the story ourselves and see, I suppose, how it relates to Michael Myers' character. But so Carl Charlie Brandt, so Carl Brandt was his full name, but he was known by Charlie, was born on the 23rd of February in 1957 to German parents. They were called Herbert and Ilse. So normally my pronunciation is pretty terrible, so I had to Google this. So it is Ilse, Eelzee, Brandt. As I said, they're both German immigrants who first settled in Texas and then eventually moved to Connecticut, where they sort of had their family home base. Charlie's father worked he was a labourer for the division of International Harvest, which meant that he had to travel quite a lot. So they had went to different conventions all over America, which meant that Charlie and his sister Angela frequently changed schools. As a young child, as someone who doesn't really have much of a settled home life, it can take its toll on you. And it was evident that, this sort of travel, this constant travel, did have an issue with Charlie growing up. It was said at school that he was a really good student. He was quite smart, but he was very shy and reserved because he was unable to adapt to new surroundings. So they would have spent, say, a month in one school and then they were off in the next. It also made him and his sister, made him quite difficult making friends. So they didn't really ever have a sort of solid relationship with anyone outside of each other and their family. Eventually his father sort of got like a permanent job and they relocated to Fort Wayne in Indiana, and the family spent most of their time there. So eventually life for Charlie did settle down. However, on the evening of the 3rd of January in 1971, the Brandt family had all turned in for the night. Herbert, Charlie's father, was in the bathroom shaving. His mother was in the bath, and at the time she was also 8 months pregnant. And for some reason, Brandt, who was 13 at the time, had walked into the bathroom and shot both his parents at point blank range with his father's handgun, which he had taken from the dresser. So his father had survived, but his mother and her unborn child had died instantly. Brandt had then went into his sister's room, attempted to shoot her, but the gun wouldn't fire. So out of the blue, essentially, he just went in and took this rage upon his parents. While in the sister's room, the two had an altercation, basically. Angela was able to calm down her brother, promised him that she would sort of help him to understand what he had done. It was said that she had noticed that he was almost like glass-eyed, and had no sort of recollection of what he had actually done. And once Angela had got him sort of round to himself, he had no idea what he had done, had no recollection of what room he had been in, where he had came from. He still thought he was in his bed. And essentially his sister brought him outside of the house to sort of calm him down because, at the time his father had just been shot. It was a crazy situation, and his sister thought it would be better to get him out of the house. Once outside the house, Brandt realised then that he had just killed his mother and attempted to kill his father. Unfortunately, when the police arrived then, Herbert identified his son as the attacker, which led him to basically imprisonment at a very young age. It was said, Angela later in an interview said that her brother appeared to be in a really trance-like state. He couldn't remember what he had done, and had only broke out of the sort of state whenever his sister had shook him in the struggle. So he was then taken into police for questioning, obviously identified as the attacker, so they knew who it was, but the police wanted to get to the bottom of why he had actually done it. And And Charlie essentially said that it was a combination of things that had been going on in his head, and everything, he was quoted saying that everything sort of snapped in my mind. So for someone at 13 to have all of that in his head and then, you know, all of a sudden just snap it is quite scary. And he had said that up to that point, he had never thought about killing his parents before. He had never thought about murder. He had never thought about attacking anyone. But it was that split second where he had snapped, that he wanted to shoot someone, and afterward he felt like he didn't want to do it again. So it was very strange, and it was a blitzed attack as well, because none of it was premeditated. What also then came up afterward while he was being interviewed by the police, he had told them that a few days prior they were taking a holiday in Florida at Christmas, and he used to go out shooting with his father, so he was well aware of how to use a gun and I suppose hunting and things like that. But his father, while they were out shooting, had shot and killed their dog, and Herbert had sort of shushed it off to Charlie and played it down like it was nothing. So Charlie had said that was another factor that sort of made him want to attack his parents, that, you know, his father had killed his dog and essentially thought it was completely okay. So we talked about dog killings. There you go. There's another one to add in. So essentially, Charlie was too young to be imprisoned, and given his sort of frenzied state, they thought it best that he was taken into a psychiatric institution. So 3 separate psychiatric evaluations were taken, and they failed to determine what actually triggered Charlie shooting his mother and his father. Because he was too young to be tried for murder under Indiana law, he spent 1 year at a psychiatric hospital before being released back into the custody of his family in June 1972. When he was released, the family never spoke of the incident again, and almost like the dog being shot at Christmas was just brushed under the cover. It was up until 2004 that Brant's 2 other younger sisters were under the impression that their mother was actually killed in a car accident. So they had no idea that Brant had murdered her up to that point, which again is a massive secret to live with, and obviously detrimental to the family to then find that out later on. So different things happened then when Brant was released. The family relocated to Ormond Beach, which is another area in Florida, in the hopes that they could sort of put the horrific past behind them. Brant's father had already remarried within that year, but he would later return to Indiana with his then wife and 2 additional daughters, leaving both Charlie and his sister Angela in the custody of their grandparents in Florida.
I didn't mean to interrupt you. I didn't mean to interrupt your Therese, but can you just imagine that first Christmas dinner back home after everything that happened? Just like Charlie one end of the table, the dad on the other. Dad just looking at the gunshot wound. It's like, remember that, Charlie? Remember?
Or even like Thanksgiving, you know, it's so big in America, yes. And they're like, let's all go around and say what we're all thankful for. And Charlie's daddy being sarcastic, is like, oh well, I'm really thankful for this gun wound in my body. And the
Angela's
fact that my wife was no longer here.
Angela's like, I'm thankful the gun jammed.
Like,
it's crazy.
It and I think a lot of this sort of adds up to what later happens to Charlie as well.
But yeah, I'll let you get back to that, and
that's fine. And it's a pretty funny thing given the situation. But this is someone who, like, so Stanley, his childhood was a fictional sort of made up story. Charlie's was somewhat normal in a sense that in America, I suppose it's quite a big thing that families would travel a lot depending on the parents' job, but it's not going to suit everybody. So, you know, there would be some people that would say that Charlie didn't have a great childhood because he didn't have anywhere to settle. So you don't know maybe if that is then a contributing factor. But at this time when he was living with his grandparents, it appeared that everything was okay, essentially. He was able to move on. He went back to school, he had got himself a good job, and yeah, essentially it just seemed like he was trying to move on and live a somewhat normal life. He met his girlfriend and eventually married her, and her name was Therese Rea Helfrich. I'm reading this off my tablet and it's really small. But we'll just call her Terry. So he married her in 1986, and they settled in a beach house on a Big Pine Key in Florida in 1989. So clearly Florida has a big place in the Brant family hearts, because they can't get away from here. Again, like his life from coming out after the institution, for several years it appeared that Charlie and Terry had an idyllic life. They were always together. They appeared to other people that they were the perfect married couple. And at the time, it was evident that the issues in his past hadn't crept up into the future. It was said that when he got married to Terry, Angela, his sister, had urged him to confess about what had happened when they were kids, but it was never truly confirmed whether he actually told Terry about the murder of his mother. You never know. If he had done that, they maybe wouldn't be together, but who knows.
It's very EastEnders territory you were in now.
It totally is. Albert Square all over it.
That one up and getting to know you conversation.
they're all intertwined. And unfortunately, what appears to just be a common occurrence in his life, another tragedy struck. And on the 2nd of September in 2004, Hurricane Ivan struck Florida, and it was a pretty horrific hurricane. Destroyed multiple homes, multiple businesses, and where the family were staying, their house was completely destroyed. So they were forced to relocate and move in with Terry's niece, Michelle Lynn Jones, who didn't live too far away, lived on her own, and was more than happy to welcome them in and I suppose look after them while repairs were being done on their house. Again, they moved in. They obviously were having issues with, the destruction of their home. So there was quite strained relationships. Michelle was used to living on her own, and then had welcomed in this couple that initially what she had seen appeared quite perfect, but on the inside they weren't great. They apparently had numerous drunken arguments that soon turned into quite violent arguments. But I suppose Michelle dealt with it as she could at the time. So it was about a week later, on the 13th of September, Michelle's friend Lisa was due to visit the home. However, Michelle had turned her away because she had said that the Brant couple had been fighting all night. They were completely blocked, and it just wasn't the time for them to be there. After that night, Jones stopped answering returning calls from her family and her friends, which alerted her family and acquaintances because it was behaviour that was unlike Michelle. 2 days later, September 15th, another one of Michelle's friends, a woman called Debbie Knight, had called to the house to check on them. And on the while, she was on the phone to Michelle's mother as well. Family and friends just couldn't understand why she wasn't answering her phone. And they also couldn't get in touch with Charlie and Terry either. So things started getting a bit suspicious. Debbie found that the front door was locked. So she tried to enter through the garage. And while she went through the garage, she found Charlie Brant's decomposing body hanging from the rafters in the garage. He had hanged himself with bed sheets from the spare bed they were staying in. She then went on into the house, contacted the police, where they found the bodies of Terry, Brant's wife, and Michelle. Terry had been stabbed 7 times in the chest while lying on the couch. Michelle had been decapitated and disemboweled, with her heart and organs removed, and her head was placed next to her body. The weapons that were used in the crime were knives, different sizes of knives, all found in Michelle's kitchen. It was then that they sort of put two things together, that it was clearly Charlie who had committed the murders. They immediately went to their home to find any evidence as to why he would commit these murders. And when they had entered the house, it revealed a startling number of revelations. A search of the sort of, and this was the thing as well, their house was sort of in ruins. So the police had to really sort of search through to find what they could. But they almost found like a hidey hole sort of box. And in that box, he had a monthly subscription to Victoria's Secret's catalogue, an extensive collection of surgery-themed books, posters, clippings, and regularly searched online for autopsy photos and snuff films that depicted violence against women. Because of Brandt's prior offences, which were still on his record, the Florida police decided to see if they could link any cold case murders to Brandt's whereabouts and essentially his type of MO, which then further linked him, which then led him to being further linked to possibly 26 unsolved murders, dating as far back as 1973. So I just have a few of the victims here. I'll just touch upon a couple of them. So in 1978, Carol Sullivan was abducted from a school bus stop. So she was only 12 in Wasilla County on the 20th of September. Her skull was found in a bucket, leading authorities to presume she was murdered and decapitated. Brandt was 20 at the time and lived in Volusia County, but he could not be tied to the crime in any other way. So this one is a possible link, mainly based on how Michelle was murdered. There was Lisa Saunders in 1988. Saunders was 20, was beaten, stabbed, and dragged from her car in Big Pine Key. Her heart was missing when she was found, but it was unclear if it was extracted by the attacker at the time or if it was eaten by any of the sort of animals that would have been about the mountain where Big Pine Key was. And then finally, 1989, Sherry Paraiso, who was 38, she was a homeless woman and she was partially clothed when she was found on the 16th of July. Her throat had been sliced and her head had nearly been severed. Like Michelle, her body was extensively mutilated and her heart was removed. Her body was found less than 1,000 feet away from where Brandt lived at the time. And Brandt also matched a composite sketch of a man who had been seen crossing a route at the time, which was really close to where the body was discovered. Terry apparently, and this came out, that she had confided in her brother-in-law that she suspected Brandt in the Paraiso killing. So her brother-in-law had come out and had said this afterward. Because Terry and Charlie were both dead, it was hard to sort of determine if it was true or not. But it was another sort of piece of evidence that linked him to this murder. And then finally, 1995, there was Darlene Toller, who was 38. Darlene was a sex worker from Miami whose body, missing her head and heart, was wrapped in a plastic covering. So it was kind of like cling film, and was discovered near a highway. Brandt had used the same highway regularly for a job, and this was kept on a record of his mileage. So the same how often he had drove past. It shows an entry for 100 miles. Most of those miles were taken around the time that she was found. And the driving distance that they had sort of recorded was between Big Pine Key and Miami. So where he lived at the time and where she was found on the day of her murder. So these are just a sort of short example. As I said, he's linked to 26, so there is plenty out there. But it was never really proven exactly if he had committed these murders, but the MO with Michelle and Terry's murder, it is so similar that it's hard not to sort of link the two. So it's never really been determined as to why Brandt committed these crimes. Firstly against his family and then possibly to the victims later on in his life. Most psychiatrists revealed that he had snapped at the time, which would explain what he had done with his parents, but it would not really explain, I suppose, what had happened further down the line, because a lot of the murders, to be honest, seem premeditated if the MO matches quite a lot. Brant isn't allowed to answer for himself. The victims, unfortunately, aren't allowed to answer for themselves. So to this day, it's really a mystery as to why he did anything. And he's just a crazy bastard, really. So yeah.
As we always call them, perennial shite bags.
Yeah.
Every last one of them.
I felt like I really brought down the mood with that one. Yours was a wee bit comical because of the lifting the cars at the end.
Yeah, and killing all the children and their families in their house. That was great.
Yeah. So no. Jim, if you're still with us and you haven't fallen asleep, we've
talked enough.
We'll talk about something that you actually enjoy now, which is Halloween.
So Halloween, what is it about it that you love so much? Just a general overview before we really get into it. What is it about Halloween that just makes that just ticks for you?
Halloween, have you got? I mean, I've talked about this on many occasions. I mean, I saw it way too young because my story is that I've got a brother who's 10 years older than me, so whatever he was watching, I was watching, and when he was 16, so I was 6, we were watching Halloween. And I think, I mean, initially I responded to it purely as a viewer, and I thought it was the most terrifying film I'd ever seen. But somehow, you know, horror, as I'm sure we all agree, it is an excitable emotion, you know, to feel. So I was just in love with it, and then, you know, started to read about it and was like, wow, you know, this was an independent film that cost like no money whatsoever, very, you know, technically proficient despite the budget, and kind of made me go, well, do you know what, if you ever want to be a filmmaker, maybe you don't have to be from America, maybe you don't have to, you know, have the best of gear and, you know, to make an effective thing. All you have to do is have a good story. And then reading about Carpenter and Deborah Hill, and you sort of say, wow, these are like, you know, tried, untested filmmakers. Carpenter composed his own scores, and it was just like, you know, this is the guy I want to be. So I've basically spent the last 30 years trying to be him and failing, but you know.
No, it's not failure, it's a work in progress. That's what it is, Jim. Don't put yourself down. But yeah, just with the film itself, then, you know, you know, you've touched upon a few of the, you know, the major points as to what makes it click. Like, I remember when I first seen it, I think it was a BBC Two showing of it on Halloween night, I think when I was 16, and I was always a latecomer to horror because I was just too scared and it was too intense for me to even, you know, watch it. Like, when I was very young, I think, what was it, Return of the Living Dead traumatized me. Like, I laugh at it now as intended, but it traumatized me. It was like, no, horror, I'm done with it. So then I thought, right, I'll give Halloween a chance, because by then I was actually a fan of Carpenter from the likes of, you know, his more action oriented stuff like Assault on Precinct 13 and Escape from New York. So I was like, right, I'll give Halloween a chance. Scared the living hell out of me. But it didn't put me off horror. It's like you said, it was the excitement of it all that sort of, you know, drew me in and pulled me towards it. So then that sort of opened the doorway for me. Like, the moment that still sticks in my head to this day is when Laurie, I think it's after she's asked the children to like run and lock the door. No, sorry, I lie. It's whenever she's discovered the bodies of all her friends that Michael's sort of displayed. He is just lingering in the darkness, and whatever way the lighting is, it just, you know, it gets brighter and brighter. It's like your eyes adjust into the darkness and his face just appears, and that just scared the living hell out of me. But at the same time, I was like, that's just really impressive, you know, how they managed to do something so simple yet so effective. So it was from there on in, I was just sort of hooked in the genre, and like you, I just had to sort of find out everything about not only like John Carpenter and Deborah Hill, just about, you know, the series itself, because by that stage, I think it was just before the Rob Zombie films were out, so by up to then we were up to Halloween Resurrection at that stage, but we're not, we've said beforehand we're not going to talk about that one.
We talked in the horror tonight, I think that's
yeah. We briefly mentioned it. That's all it should link to Halloween there. But what about you, Therese? What is it about Halloween that makes makes it such a classic in your eyes?
I mean, I don't want to sort of repeat what the both of you said. It's it's so iconic, and you know, Jim, you talk about John Carpenter like composing his own music like that, as I terribly did it earlier. The theme song of Halloween is so iconic. Like, you may have never seen Halloween, but when you hear it, you know exactly who it's supposed to be about. It's Michael Myers. Um, and you know, anytime I watch the movies, no matter, and I'm talking about the whole span, you know, if we'll ignore the sort of actual linear format that it's supposed to be, but anytime I hear it in any one of the films, I just get goosebumps. And like, even if the film itself is completely ridiculous, as soon as they bring in that piece of music, which probably wasn't even that complicated really either, like it was maybe just a couple of chords, I just feel like something come over me. You know, we were talking before that I'd recently seen New Halloween Kills came out. And I didn't see the 2018 Halloween in cinemas. I watched it at home. And it's evident to think that, you know, it's better to watch certain films in the cinema. And I made a point that I would watch Halloween Kills in the cinema. And I was sitting there, and, you know, there was people talking around me, just genuinely being arsey. But as soon as I heard that music, I just completely zoned out, and I was like, no, right, there's no one here. It's me, and it's Michael, and it's Laurie Strode, and we're ready to keep her lit. Let's like try and kill the immortal man again, type of thing that's never gonna die. But yeah, I would say it was my well, to be honest, Return to Oz was sort of my gateway into horror. Absolutely shit myself with that now. But even to this day, I've seen it many a time. But Joe, you know, those scenes where Michael, anytime Michael's lurking in the background, is when I'm like, oh, here we go. Shit's about to hit the van. Somebody's going to be pushed into a van. Somebody's going to be hung from a tree. Like, you know something bad's going to happen. But for someone who has literally no lines whatsoever, he's probably one of the most scary horror icons ever. Like, he doesn't need to speak. He's that scary.
Yeah. I think just sort of on that note, it's interesting. I had my niece over to watch the original one the other night, and you know, she's 15 and just loved it. And she's a child of the modern world, you know.
Yeah.
She's not of a time. I think what's interesting about Halloween is that film sensibility has changed so much. You would assume that a film like Halloween wouldn't work now because it is more suspense than you know, direct jump scares and whatever. But she absolutely loved it and was like, you know, it was like, well, so what happens next? And like, what? They're brother and sister? And I was like, okay, this is gonna get complicated whenever you go to see the new Halloween Kills.
You just get out a chart and you're like, well, here we have Halloween 2, and then here's
exactly.
Yeah.
As an entry, and she's seen a bunch of the horror films. She's seen Scream and loved it and whatever, which are more high energy. But this was the one that I think she was like, oh wow, that's it. I get it. I get what you mean. Whenever, you know, you say that like that's like Carpenter's always equated it to the stretching of a band. You know that band's gonna snap.
Yeah.
And you're just kind of going, oh God, please, hurry up and at least snap. So at least I'm over it, but he doesn't let you. And it's just a masterpiece.
Well, that's what I mean. You're absolutely right, and you hit the nail on the head with the suspense. Like, things really don't amp up until really the last half hour, when, you know, it's basically down to Michael and Laurie in the house. Like, don't get me wrong, there's intermittent moments when he, you know, kills some of Laurie's friends as well, but that last section's just, you know, it's unrelenting in its suspense and that. But just even taking things back, in terms of the film itself, you know, for me, one of the things that really makes it work and has helped it endure are the characters themselves. Because in many, you know, this film sort of, you know, led on to the likes of the Friday the 13th series and other, you know, B-grade slashers, which, you know, are fun in their own right, but they're nowhere near Halloween's levels or standards. But characters in those films are basically just, you know, meatbags just waiting to be killed by the mass killer. Whereas in this here, Laurie and her friends they seem like real, high school girls talking about their own issues and stuff like that there, and that's one of the things that makes it work. But what's like your opinion on the characters themselves, Jim, in general? Like, do you think that's one of the key strengths of this film, or
Yeah, absolutely. No, I totally agree. And my colleague Margaret McGoldrick and I were uh, in the midst of prep trying to get a documentary about Deborah Hill off the ground, because I think she's the big unsung hero of Halloween. She gave that voice to those women, and without them, as you say, they're just caricatures. And I think that's something that was never replicated in any of the other slasher films that came after it. But the other thing I would say, just in relation to what we're talking about, is you can't forget the setting of Haddonfield, because it's such a typical town. And horror, I get that, maybe Texas Chainsaw Massacre was set in a house, and Black Christmas was set in a sorority house and whatever, but those settings seem kind of off the beaten track. Halloween set right in the middle of the average street, and kind of is the first film to ask that question, like, what's going on behind those doors? And when you look at a case like Charlie Brand, what you sort of say is, you go, we really don't know what the guy down the street is thinking. He's got his subscriptions to what was it, Victoria's Secret, and he's got his wee hidey holes. What other secrets are my neighbors hiding? That's the scary aspect that they really brought out in Halloween for me.
Yeah. What about you, Therese? Like, we know, like, I know personally just from you're a huge Jamie Lee Curtis fan, and obviously this is the film this launched her career. So, Nick, what are your thoughts, like, on Laurie as a character? Not only in this film, but I suppose you can bring in, the later films, even though a lot of them have been erased from current timelines and that there. But, what are your thoughts towards Laurie as a character in general?
I think I'll agree again with Jim's point on Deborah Hill as a writer. Horror movies, 9 times out of 10, it's the exact same trope, it's the exact same story. I think even more so, like, with there's some sort of offerings from Blumhouse that, yes, they're trying to do better and have, I suppose, more female representation and have more of a story. But for something that was released when it was, like, it's a story that you're actually invested in. Like, as you said, the girls themselves, it's Halloween night, they all have boyfriends. There's that trope of having sex and having relationships, but on top of it all, like, they all go to school. Laurie really wants to excel at school. She wants to go into college. She has all this, like, ahead of her. Her parents really depend on her, and you almost root for her even before Michael comes into the picture. Like, you just want her to do well, and to see someone who in that story is depicted as ready to succeed, having that literally taken away from her. And you can look at it in other films, and more so, I suppose, like Halloween H2O and stuff like that, and the sort of guffy shite. They write the character of Laurie in a, I suppose she is a heroine as well, but they sort of take this, like, real Hollywood aspect to her, and make her like a Charlie's Angels, like, all fighting, all dancing, bombastic woman. Whereas in the newer films, like 2018 Halloween and Halloween Kills, even though she's in Halloween Kills for like 5 minutes, you see the sort of the jump between a woman who is literally going to excel at life, having it all taken away, and her life is ruined. Like, you come to Halloween 2018, you see that she has a family, but her family don't want anything to do with her. There's different snippets between, her daughter and her, and how Laurie's relationship and how she dealt with everything that went on to Michael was then transferred onto her daughter. Her daughter then had her clear own issues as a child that she then passed on to her daughter. And it's a story that you want to follow, and if we take away and only see it from, as we have the original Halloween 2018, Kills, and then the next installment, there's a real sort of in-depth linear story there that you don't get with other horror films. Maybe the closest I would say for me would maybe be Scream, although some of the Screams as well do get a bit daft. But yeah, you know, for a horror, most people look for a jump scare, a gory murder, a devil, a witch, or something mental, just to sort of give them that adrenaline rush. But with Halloween, there is the sort of looming character of Michael Myers. But again, Jim, you're right. You don't know what's going on in people's backgrounds. You know, there's Dr. Loomis. He clearly has a lot of issues himself. There's all of the other, you know, sort of patients in the psychiatric hospital that are released. And yeah, like Haddonfield is a town, but this story sort of isolates and it makes it into something that it's sort of like a vacuum of all its problems. But yeah, I mean, ultimately, I could talk about Jamie Lee Curtis all day. She's absolutely fantastic, and this launched her career, and what a career she has. She's had. She's not dead. Sorry, my God.
Still going. Still going.
Not dead.
I think it's just to sort of pick up on that, if I can. There's a really beautiful scene. I think it's a very underrated scene in Halloween when Jamie Lee Curtis is in the car on the way to the babysitting job with Annie, Nancy Loomis. And it's a scene that's actually directed by Deborah Hill, believe it or not, because they didn't have a bridge from day to night, so they needed this sort of sunset, you know, scene. And it's this scene where Laurie kind of admits that she's not just this shy bookworm, that she actually does fancy a boy, and Annie then goes and phones him and gets her a date with him. And I think you're absolutely right that like that was the night literally where she was almost on the cusp of being a normal happy teenager, and then it's arrested. But I would say though that like in relation to the sequels, I think H2O does a better job of depicting her as a sort of a broken woman, because there's another beautiful scene where she's in a restaurant and her boyfriend goes to the bathroom and she asks the waiter for another glass of Chardonnay, and she just drinks the one that she has, and you just kind of go like, oh, she is broken, because she's been waiting the whole time to drink this wine because she's an alcoholic. She's just a functioning alcoholic. And it's just one of those things where you go, you know, not a lot of horror movies reach this level of depth, and I think we should because they get lumped in with like, you know, Pieces and you know, all the I Spit on Your Graves and all these other sort of ones that you just kind of go, no, don't lump them in the same ballpark as Halloween, because it is, whether you like it or not, it is a well told piece of cinema as well as being a horror film.
Yeah, funny thing, that's the thing about it as well. Whenever I did rewatch it for this year, I watched it with my girlfriend. That was the first time she'd seen it, and she's always been sort of apprehensive about slashers and that in general, because, like you said, she probably did just lump it in with all the, you know, Friday the 13th and so on and so forth. But you know, her only criticism was towards the end when, you know, Michael shows his true form as this, you know, unstoppable force of nature, where no matter what Laurie does, you know, stabs him, whatever, he comes back. And like, I think it was this case where she's, you know, slumped at the doorway and he's on the floor just outside the dresser doors, and he just leans up, that iconic shot of him leaning up. She just went, oh, for goodness sake, because she's constantly thinking, that's it, it's over, it's finished. Like, she didn't even say that, mind you, at the very end, whenever, you know, Loomis looks over the balcony after shooting him and he's gone. But overall she did say, no, I did like that, that's good. Not much more beyond that, so I'll just take the compliment as is, and hope there were no further complaints.
We'll not be inviting Catherine on to talk about it then. We'll just leave it at that. We'll understand and say, yep.
Well, that's the thing. She's only ever seen this one, and I think this will be the only one out of, I think
she'll ever seen.
Yeah, I think was there like with Kills, there's 12 in total, and that's including the remakes that we won't mention at all. But yeah, just even moving on, even just before we even get on to Michael, just Loomis as a character, the world's worst psychiatrist, is like, well, I can't save my patient at all. I can't get through to him. I'm just going to try and kill him now because that's the best thing to do. Because, when I seen him as a child, I just knew he was evil. So, what am I going to do? I'm just going to shoot him. But the thing is, he's kind of proved right anyway. And then as the sequels go on, I don't know if you've seen the likes of 4 and 5. Did you say you'd seen them, Trace? Where
Yeah,
Loomis
so
comes back, yeah.
remember whenever I did the
completely off
rewatch
the rails.
last year? Yeah, he's off his absolute tree. Like, God help me.
Yeah, even though he shouldn't be in 4 or 5 because after 2 he literally blows up, but he only has like a slight, scar on his face that looks like a burnt pizza. But yeah, him as a character, as crazy and that over the top as this, that's what makes him entertaining. That's sort of what drew me in. And that's why I kind of really, in terms of the sequence, I like 4 quite a bit. 5, no, not so much. But what do you think of Loomis as a character, Jim? What's your impression of him?
I'm a real staunch defender of Loomis. Actually, I think I'm one of my heart because the way I think about it, and I've overthought this franchise. I'll freely admit. You're just talking about your girlfriend, my fiance. God bless her. She's moved in now, and I have a shrine to Halloween. I own 29 copies of the first film alone. You know what I mean? So she's put up with a lot. So I've analyzed this film quite a bit, and I think my taking of the Loomis character is that he believes that Michael transcends psychology, and I think that this sort of more Hammer horror language that he uses when he talks about the devil's eyes and stuff like that is because he is the only person who's ever examined him and therefore ever understood that no, this isn't a crazy person. This isn't somebody who's just like had a bad upbringing in the way that Rob Zombie depicted him. This is somebody who has transcended the basic human form and is just evil. So therefore his language and his methods are kind of justified. So he's not a psychiatrist. He's more like, in a weird way, he's more like a demonologist or an exorcist.
He's like Van Helsing to Dracula, basically.
Exactly. Yeah. That's it. He's he's Dr. Frankenstein. He has a monster, and there's no negotiation with it. It has to just be stomped out. But the tragedy is obviously that Michael makes too much money at the box office to ever be killed. So here we go.
One of the conditions Mustafa had before passing said, he's like, Michael can never be killed, which is why we got the ending from H2O. But yeah, before even continuing, it's just I'm just being conscious of the time here. What about Michael as a character then? Why is it that in the sort of pantheon of the Hall of Fame of slashers, as it were, with the likes of Jason and Freddy Krueger and that, they're how does Michael stick out from amongst them as being such a memorable and iconic character to you, Jim?
Well, I mean, for me, there's Mask. His mask is behind me. He's number one for sure, and I think that he's an odd one in that. I suppose you get with Freddy Krueger, there's a lot of personality there because he has a voice and so forth. With Jason Voorhees, he has a backstory because he's not in the original film and so forth. Michael Myers is purely interesting because he's a blank slate. And what's interesting about the films is that the more and more they try to answer some questions, the less interesting he becomes, to the point where in the Rob Zombie remake, it's like, oh, he's not, this quasi supernatural entity. He's just basically Stanley Spears. He really wanted to go trick or treating, and his sister wouldn't take him, and he snapped. And you sort of go, oh, the mystery and the mystery's gone here. The mask is just a reflection of Michael Myers. There's a man underneath that, but there's no emotion, there's nothing else, and I think that's what makes him interesting, is because you go, right, I can't negotiate with you. You don't have a motivation. You're just here to do this. Freddy's avenging his death. Jason's avenging his mother's death. Harry Warden, in My Bloody Valentine, is avenging his being buried in the mine. Everybody has a reason except Michael. Michael, you just have to get away from, otherwise you're going to be a victim.
Yeah. No, no, absolutely. And it's that there that makes it terrifying. Whereas like the other characters, like with Jason, what, as that series progressed, what was about him where like the thing is the audience kept asking like, how's he going to kill people this time? Is he gonna, use like grab someone in a sleeping bag and smash him off a tree, so on and so forth. And with Freddy, is like, what quips is he gonna deliver as he kills off teens in an imaginative way in their dreams? Whereas Michael is just like, it doesn't matter, I'm just gonna take anything in the hand and I'm just gonna kill you, and there's no reason or behind it. It's just, you're there and I have to kill you, and that's it. Which just makes it completely terrifying, because like you said, there is no reasoning with him, there's no anything to it. And it sort of touches on the end of the film as well. When Loomis does shoot him out the window, it's the way he looks over the balcony and he kind of goes, kind of knew that was going to happen. Like, even though I've shot him 6 times, he flies over the balcony and, his body's lying there. You're like, yeah, but that's not him done. He's an unstoppable force of evil, and he will always remain that way, and he'll continue. And he's sort of just on his quest to just stop him from killing, essentially, but it's one that's in vain. What about you, Therese? What do you think of Michael as a character?
Again, much, I suppose, when you look at the case of Charlie Brandt, that obviously they were never able to really determine why he killed his mother and tried to attempt to kill his sister and his father. And it's the same way with Michael and his sister. Like you just don't know, like, why. And in some films, the audience would be asking for the reason to go, but what? Like, some people would get fed up to the point where if they're not being given a reason as to why he did it, why bother anyway? But it's the fact that Michael as a character is so captivating. Like, he's mysterious. There's the mysteriousness with the mask as well. No one ever knows what he looks like, and whether or not we ever will know what he looks like.
In the first one.
Yeah, when he lifts off, but the thing is, he's still kind of in shadow as well.
He's in shadow, so
it's not complete.
You see sort of, he's never shown. So Michael under the mask is never shown in full light, like full everything.
Like yourself now.
Yeah. When he is, it's either, I forgot about the bit in Halloween at the beginning, but it's not, it's always either like half lit in the background. You see him as a kid, yes, but you don't know what he looks like as an adult, and that sort of mysteriousness there too is like, what is really behind the mask? Like, there's clearly no expression there. There's clearly no arguing with him. He is on an intent to sort of kill, and it's touched upon, I suppose, in the likes of Halloween Kills, that what is the fascination with Laurie Strode? And obviously there's different things, in sort of the span of the movies as to why, but it's like anytime his family home is brought into the equation, he's drawn back to it. And it's like, is the family home that sort of source of evil? Like, did something happen to Michael as a child for him to go his way with it? Or like Charlie Brandt, did he just go one day, flipped out and just went no? Whenever he murders his sister, like, clearly she's surprised because she's being stabbed, but you know what I mean? Like, she sort of has like a warm tone to her voice whenever she initially addresses him. So it's almost like in your mind, was there any ever hostility between the two of them? She obviously was a bit older, but you wonder, like, did anything happen between the two of them? But there's that sort of brief moment where she calls out his name. It doesn't appear that there was any sort of hostility, and yeah, it's the mystery that comes with it, and he doesn't need to speak to be able to express himself either. Like, he's underneath a mask that it literally does not have any expression. Like, it's so plastic, it's unbelievable. But he does these head tilts, and when he's being inquisitive, and even sometimes when he's standing completely solitary, the movement and the body language, you can kind of almost tell how he's feeling. And with Freddy and Jason and even Billy and Scream and things, you know, they almost have to use their voice to sort of get their character across.
Mm-hmm.
But Michael doesn't need it at all. It's the presence alone that holds its own.
Yeah.
And it's probably why it has spanned such a decade of movies and popular culture and just references and everything, really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but that's what I mean. Like, he almost takes pride in a way in what he does, because, you know, at the end of the first one, like, he doesn't set up the shrine for Laurie. It's just like his way of playing with the things in general. It's just Laurie happens to come upon it. And then even in the you know, Halloween Kills there, you know, there's a moment where he's in a kitchen and he's just, you know, he's subdued someone and he stabbed him once in the back, but then he starts, you know, going back and forth for different knives to try and see, well, which is the best one to use for, you know, killing. You know, it's a fascination he has within the killing.
Yeah, it's like, and how should I position this type of thing?
Yeah.
Like, some people think that it's a spree, but there must be some sort of method to it, because it doesn't happen with everybody. But when the bodies are found, not all of them are just killed with a knife. Like, he uses so many different things that he's almost displaying what he's done to be like, I am who I am and this is what I can do, type of thing.
Pretty much. But
that's an interesting point. So if I could just bring up,
go.
You're a bit of an expert on this, Therese. So didn't Ed Kemper display his mum's head on the fireplace?
Oh, see, there's me saying that it wasn't going to drop, but did. Yeah, Ed Kemper, he not the fireplace. So Ed Kemper, anytime he was, and any of the women that he had murdered, he buried most of them in the back garden. But whenever he finally killed his mother, he positioned her body and the head basically looking directly at the house. So that anytime he looked out the window, he was able to look. She was no longer looking down on him; he was then looking down on her.
Yeah,
and that was him displaying his "this is what I can do" mother type of thing.
Yeah, and it's funny because, like, I mean, that's the other weird thing about Michael Myers when you think about it, is that, you know, clearly people like Ed Kemper and so forth got off on the kill, but also the display, and they wanted this to be a thing. Michael seems to be much more interested in the display.
Yeah.
Essentially, in the first movie, he's essentially setting up a scare house for Laurie for most of the movie.
Yeah.
You know, and that's kind of weird, because it's not just about, you know, because if he is as powerful as he's depicted in Halloween Kills, he could have just kicked open Laurie's door and killed her in 5 minutes. But it wasn't about that. Much. It was about something else.
Exactly. And unfortunately, I think we're going to have to wrap things up here, because I'm just trying to be a bit conscious of the time and that, because with this festival, there's many panels being recorded and that there, but we could go on all night talking about not just Halloween, just Michael Myers all night long. But so I just want to take the opportunity to thank you very much, Jim, for joining us in this episode, and hopefully sometime in the future we can have you on talking about another case and another film based around it. But also just want to take the opportunity to wish you the best luck in that upcoming documentary that you're hoping to get off the ground about Deborah Hill. So I hope you do get it made, because I really would be looking forward to seeing something like that.
Guys, I'll let you know if Jamie Lee Curtis replies.
Oh, big time. Yeah, you'll have to do a shout out for Therese there.
I have seen her in real life. I went to a screening in 2018 in Dublin, and she was there, and she was as perfect and wonderful as you would ever think she is.
Just look at her at the premiere, Halloween Kills, dressed as her mother from Psycho. That just says it all, doesn't it? Yep. But I suppose we're just wrapping things up now. So again, thank you, Therese, for your research on that there, and thank you all for watching, and we hope you enjoyed that episode. We'll be back hopefully next month with another episode, but until then, bye everyone.